Hello, Jose Vega is challenging a neocon puppet named Richie Torres, and we got a lot to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Well, Jose Vega is running for Congress in New York City. He's challenging just another neocon puppet, and he just happened to run into what's named Richie Torres, and he just happened to casually bump into Mr. Torres the other day at an eating establishment. Let's take a look and see how that turned out.
Congressman, you eat here? Really?
I live in the neighborhood.
Wow, that's awesome. You know, it's hard because people don't often see you in the neighborhood. That's crazy. You know, let me tell you something. You know, what is it about you and endless war? You just seem to love war, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Gaza. You know, the thousands of dead Palestinian children that you funded. You know, don't you think that that's crazy? You know,
why do you run cover for war?
Do you agree or disagree with the DNI that the war in Ukraine is pretty much over and that the Trump administration is trying to? I'm a tool of the Kremlin? Seriously? You know what is reality? That you are responsible for the death of thousands of Palestinian children, thousands of Ukrainian children. You love funding war. You love funding genocide. Listen, the crowd prince of genocide is here, thinking he can just get away by sitting here and eating comfortably while there are thousands of Palestinian children who have to suffer because of the decisions of this guy who is either responsible, since he's in the Congress, for doing absolutely, you know, nothing about it, or the fact that he gets funding from AIPAC.
Cover for war criminals. Why do you use our voice
Congressman,
to support the erasure of Palestine?
Congressman, no matter where you go in the Bronx, people hate you because they know the truth about you, Congressman. They know what you really are, a sellout, an AIPAC sellout, okay? All you do is get paid by the Israeli lobby. You are nothing. You're a joke of a congressman. You have no real principles whatsoever.
Why do you use my voice to whitewash war crimes, Richie Torres?
Congressman!
Why do you use my voice to run cover for war criminals like Bibi Netanyahu? What do you get from Israel to run cover for them? You're a disgrace. You're a disgrace to your constituency. You should resign. You should be primary.
Take care,
Shame
Congressman.
on you, Richie. Don't touch me. You don't need to touch me. Don't put your hands on me. All right? Come on, guys. Let's go. You made your point.
Well, Jose, you know, it's interesting because you've gotten a lot of press in the past. You've done what's been referred to as interventions, wherein, you know, whether it was AOC or some of these other warmongers, you stepped up to the plate, you've called them out, you've embarrassed them. Let's talk about Richie Torres. For those of you who don't know, Jose is challenging Richie Torres in the Bronx for a very important seat, and he's challenging him, you know, not from the left, not from the right. He's challenging him from the perspective of peace and from the perspective of looking out for the American people first. Your thoughts, Jose?
So let's just situate this for a second. He is the congressman of the poorest congressional district in the entire country. You know, and you can't say that often enough, right? The Bronx, in the same place where Wall Street is, right? In New York City, the Bronx, one of the richest places in the world, is also one of the poorest places in the world, right here, New York 15th Congressional District, right? Now, this man was voted in almost 6 years ago in 2020 and has done absolutely nothing for the people of the Bronx. In fact, you know, that video went viral amongst people here in the Bronx, and a lot of people didn't even care what I was saying. They were just happy that this guy was being confronted. That's how rabid it was. People were like, I don't know what you meant by Ukraine. I don't know what you were talking about this DNI thing. I was just glad that somebody got into his face and decided to tell him the truth. And also people were sending me videos of him going to the, you know, so like people here in the housing, in the public housing places, they host little holiday parties for the tenants, and Richie Torres shows up. People were sending me videos of them grilling him you know, and they're saying like, oh, I did this the other day too. I was just too afraid to post it, but now I'm going to go do that. I was like, yes, go, like, do that. You know, don't be afraid to confront these people wherever they may be. You know, the message is very clear about the congressman of this area, is that he is no different than the rest of the Congress. So if anything, he's a good metaphor for the entire ruling class, right? You know, that the direction that the Bronx is going in, you know, being one of just the worst places in the country, is the direction that the whole country is going in right now. And so Richie Torres represents the Congress, which is that he doesn't do anything for the people who he represents. And yet he takes all this money from foreign lobbying, from foreign governments like the Israeli lobby, from AIPAC. He took $1.6 million from AIPAC, and it's not just AIPAC. Wall Street funds him, crypto donors fund him, you know, and he has no ideas. He's vapid. He doesn't actually, you know, make the decisions on how he votes. Somebody else tells him how to vote. That's just the truth. He has nothing there. He couldn't say anything back to me except what? He called me a Kremlin tool. A tool of the Kremlin. That's amazing, you know. And somebody said, is he really red scaring you in the year of 2025? You know, what is this, 1955? Is he Joseph McCarthy? You know, this guy has like, so anyway, yeah, that's my initial thoughts on Mr. Torres.
Well, then I'm going to challenge you on one thing you said. You said he doesn't do anything for the people he represents. Yeah, he really does. You just got to know who he represents. He does something for the Zionists. He does something for Wall Street. He does something for the war machine. You know, that's the, I think, and I'm just saying that jokingly when I said I'm challenging you. I know you understand that. But it's just a phrasing, I think, that is automatic for people like you and I. Because in our mind, we believe, well, Jose Vega gets elected, the people that he represents are the poor people in the Bronx. So we automatically will say he doesn't do anything for the people that he represents, because our paradigm, our belief is, well, if you get these people voted for you, you're supposed to look out for them, bring home the bacon, as they used to say back in the old days, right? But now you got these AIPAC, Wall Street, military-industrial complex puppets who, sadly, they're not even trying to hide it anymore, that they represent these other forces.
Yeah, you know, Lindsey Graham was doing a Meet the Press interview, and you know, he was at a remote location, and so they put the location on top, and it's Tel Aviv, and people were upset. And I put out a comment. I said, you know, why are people upset that Lindsey Graham is in Tel Aviv? He should be with the people he represents. That's what a senator's supposed to do. So, you know, so you know, it's right. You know, who actually serves him? Who does he actually represent? Right? And you said it, Wall Street, the crypto donors, the Israeli lobby, and also NATO as well too. You know, they take him on these tours as well, and not the people who actually vote him in. And that's a problem. But it also goes to show you what the responsibility of somebody who says they want to hold elected position is, which is, no, if you vote for me, I'll do this. It's, no, I'm doing this now. I'm doing something now. I'm confronting this guy right now, because this guy does absolutely nothing for us except for the people who fund his campaigns. And as a result, that's why you should vote for me, because you see I'm out here doing something. And if you don't want to vote for me, go and do what I'm doing too. Go out in the streets. Help me confront these people. You know, there's other ways too that you can be out there putting your voice out there and saying, how about we get something done now? How about we do something now before we get to the ballot box, you know? So
let me ask you this. One of the things, so I'm going to throw a couple of things at you. You're running for office once again. Tell people what district it is and all that.
I'm running for Congress in the New York 15th Congressional District. The New York 15th Congressional District is the only congressional district entirely composed within the Bronx. So it's very much the Bronx district. Now, you know, AOC, for example, has New York 14. You know, she has a small part, well, not a small part, but a part of the Bronx and a lot of Queens, you know, and then Adriano Espaillat has a little bit of the Bronx and most of Washington Heights and Harlem. And then up north is George Latimer, who also has a little bit of the Bronx and a lot of Westchester County. But I'm running in the 15th Congressional District, and I'm running for congressman, House of Representatives, federal government. Our election, we're running both in the Dem primary and on the independent ballot line. So we've got June is the primaries, and then November is the general election. No matter what, people will see me on both elections nights. And yeah, that's who I am. That's what I'm running for, the office that I'm running for. And, you know, I didn't start by going the traditional route. I didn't join a community board and then I started working for some elected official. I didn't do that. One of the reasons I didn't do that was because I didn't want to be corrupt. I just didn't want to be corrupt. If you do that way, that's exactly how they get you. You climb the ladder, so on. You appease the establishment. You go up that way. No. I cut my teeth working with the Schiller Institute since I was about 15, 16 years old. And now they're doing some great work, working with people like Dr. Naledi Pandor, and Helga Zepp-LaRouche has this treaty, or excuse me, she has this petition to get U.S. out of NATO, to dissolve NATO, basically. And I completely endorse that and support that. And, to working with them, I cut my teeth also doing these interventions. As you said, the first intervention that I ever did was actually in winter of 2019. This one's not very known, but I actually confronted Adriano Espaillat, a New York 13th congressional district, on the war in Ukraine before the war in Ukraine even happened. Because I said, why did Victoria Nuland fund all these neo-Nazis in Ukraine? So this is the winter of 2019. This is 2 years before, or 3 years before the special military operation breaks out. But then the intervention that first caught fire was when I confronted Kamala Harris in 2021 in October. She was talking about the Build Back Better plan. She came to the Bronx to talk about the Build Back Better plan. We had just had a hurricane. I don't remember the name of the hurricane, but the hurricane killed 7 people here in New York City, and I told her that. I said, look, you're talking about families, but what about the families who drowned? 8 people died here in Queens, and it could have been prevented if we had the right infrastructure. And the problem with New York City is that you had President Carter, do a town hall in Queens in the 70s saying, yeah, this New York City sewage infrastructure, somebody's got to fix it. That was President Carter saying that almost 50 years ago. And now you got Kamala Harris saying, oh, yeah, no, once we take this, once we have the House and the Senate, once we do all this, we're going to definitely, fix everything up. It's like this has been 50 years of benign neglect. 50 years that the Bronx has been the poorest congressional district in the country. 50 years that New York City continues its descent towards collapse. 50 years of the country going towards its collapse. So I brought that out to Kamala Harris. And that's basically, I was showing right there that what other people should do is to just call out these people, to make a very simple metaphor, at the emperor has no clothes. When you do something simple like that, just tell the truth to these people's face, they melt away. And so, since then, right, I've been an advocate of working with the Schiller Institute, continued to organize with them, of course, and, then continuing the interventions as well. The war in Ukraine breaks out, the SML, and the people that I believed in, like Bernie Sanders and AOC, are all cheering it on, not understanding the sort of, you would think that these people as so-called leftists would at least try to understand the CIA angle of provoking, the war, and would at least try to understand the role that Victoria Nuland played in starting the war in Ukraine, but she doesn't. They don't, so I called out Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and not just for the war in Ukraine, but also for being a hypocrite. She said she was going to bring us Medicare for all. People are, anxious right now because how much debt are people in nowadays? What's all the medical debt that people have, or even, college tuition debt, auto loan debts, credit card debts. We saw that the Black Friday just had, I think it was something like 85% of purchases were done on a pay now or pay later, buy now, pay later thing. It's completely horrible. But I confronted her because she said she was going to cause a ruckus in the House of Representatives, and she didn't. So I confronted her, and right there, a lot that was kind of like the thing that really ignited, much more of my prominence that I have now as somebody who, will just stand up. But, ultimately my goal is to make sure that other people decide to stand up too. I don't want it to just be me, However, one of the reasons I decided to run for Congress initially was because last year, after October 7th, and we just saw the horrific slaughter of the Palestinian people. And my congressman is over there cheering on the Israelis, saying, we stand with you all the way. Don't worry, we'll make them pay for October 7th. I just thought somebody has to challenge this guy. And so I jumped in, because it was the right thing to do. The Bronx continues to just burn away. People say the Bronx is burning. This is a phrase that goes back 50 years ago. But the reason that people say it now is because buildings still get caught on fire, and nothing gets done about it. We have houses that are literally collapsing here in the Bronx. Mitchell Houses, a public housing project, the chimney just fell down. And to this day, there's a whole section of that building. I think it's something like dozens of families don't have heat or hot water, yet they still have to pay rent. And Richie Torres, he goes there and he's distributing food aid, but he doesn't have any solutions. He just keeps complaining that it's going to cost $80 billion to fix all of public housing. Well, you know what? If it is going to cost that, let's get that money. Where are we going to get that money? Let's decrease the Pentagon budget. Okay. Let's take the money that we're giving to Israel for their war crimes. Let's take that money back and let's put it into fixing Mitchell houses. But you know what they're doing instead? They're building up luxury housing right next to the public housing that collapsed. There is luxury housing on the waterfront. Not only that, the local politicians of this area have approved a casino to be built in the poorest congressional district in the country, a casino to be built while our public housing collapses. There is no national vision. Okay, we don't have a national vision. And part of the reason why I'm running too is because I actually think that we need to think big again. We need to think like city builders. The Bronx used to be a manufacturing town. One steel plant used to produce 50,000 metric tons of steel in Hunts Point. Hunts Point of the Bronx is now considered the hooker capital of the world, the crack den of the world. And it used to build the New York City skyline. I'm saying let's return back to a time when people could get a productive job rebuilding the United States, because that's the state we're in right now. We should have high-speed rail. We should be looking at the young men and women of the Bronx and saying, what do you want your life to be defined as? And would you like that to be defined as the person who rebuilt the schools that we shut down, the hospitals we shut down, to build a high-speed rail line that could get you from New York City to Washington, D.C. in less than an hour? Because that's the capability and the creativity they have in them. It is our responsibility. See, I talk about these big mega projects, and one of the things that, for the district here, I'm talking about is having a cross Bronx train that goes from east to west, because we don't have that. New York City and the Bronx, we only have north-south trains, and even though like going 3 miles east to west by car could take you 45 minutes to an hour. And it's like completely abhorrent that that's the truth, right? So I'm saying let's build the train line that goes from east to west. And if we were to do that with the current bureaucratic administration that New York State has right now, or even with the Trump administration, because they did approve a train that goes from Bronx to Queens to Brooklyn, they approved that. That's great. It's going to take 20 years to build. It's going to take 20 years to build. Think about that. I'm going to be 47 by the time I ever get to ride something from the Bronx to Queens. And the sad part is that the rail that they're talking about using, they're not talking about breaking ground. The rail's already there. They're just talking about building train stations. We used to put people on the moon. We built the Empire State Building in 400 days. Eisenhower built a network grid of highways, during his administration. You're telling me we can't build a measly train line? And you're telling me we can't put it underground? They say, well, it's expensive to go underground in the Bronx because, there's all this graphite and it's really, expensive to drill through. We're talking about the Russians wanting to work with the United States to bore a tunnel between Alaska and Russia. And you're telling me we can't use that same technology that existed? The subway was built over 150 years ago in New York City. You're telling me the technology hasn't improved since then to build tunnels? Come on, see, all of these things that I'm talking about, rebuilding public housing, making the cost of living affordable, getting rid of poverty, a national high-speed rail line, that is not a matter of, physical reality. We have the means to do this. It's a matter of political will. Do people actually want their lives to be better or not? Do your politicians reflect that? And that's why I'm saying if we go back to a policy of city building, we develop the people that we need. Because what does it take to build a city? You need young men and women who are creative, who have the capability to lead, who can build, who are welders, who know what it's like to work on a construction site, who understand what it means to build a hospital with modern means, who understand what a school needs. Then you need teachers, nurses, doctors to populate those things. You need train conductors to work the high-speed rail. Now you suddenly create a demand for an explosion of jobs that have to be filled up by an upcoming generation, or your society will collapse. And that's a good thing, because now you motivate a bunch of young people to become productive again. So Anyway,
Um,
sorry. Yeah.
let's touch on a little bit. Oh, that's great stuff. I'm with you 100%. Now, let's talk about a little bit of foreign policy. Something I want to throw at you because these are some things that are going on in Congress right now. So let me throw at your thoughts on this.
Go for it.
Jose, you get elected, right?
Mhm.
Thomas Massey has put forth a bill. Let's get the hell out of NATO. I'm just going to throw that at you. Your thoughts?
That's absolutely beautiful. I was jumping for joy when Thomas Massey put that out there. You know, NATO has no usefulness anymore, and it should have dissolved after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Frankly, it should have dissolved. It should not have been created. You know, there's a whole history there as to the former Nazis that actually created it, but we won't touch upon that here. My very simple point is that, yeah, you know, if we can't get the dissolution of NATO, which honestly is the optimal thing, getting the United States out of NATO is the second best thing, because the United States is the biggest funder of NATO. The United States is practically NATO, and pulling the United States out of NATO, this Cold War era mentality organization, needs to die, quite frankly. You know, it has been the biggest provocateur of war and over the last 20 years. You know, we don't need NATO. We don't need aggressive policy stances. No, there is a new paradigm here that we can enter now. This is something that Helga Zaporusha has been calling for, which is that you can live in a world that doesn't need NATO, because NATO exists on an aggressive posture, assuming that there are enemies that want to take over Europe. And that's just not true anymore. The Russians and the Chinese have extended their hands multiple times, saying we can work together for mutual cooperation, that we can work together to benefit each other. That's why I brought up earlier, you know, the Russians and the United States are talking about building a tunnel, you know, the Bering Strait tunnel that could connect Alaska and Russia, because it's only like 40 miles that separate Russia and Alaska. People don't know this. So you could conceivably take a train in New York City, build a high-speed rail line that goes across the United States, up to Canada, into Alaska, and into Russia. And then you could be in Russia on a single train line. That is a beautiful thing. See, but it's not even about the end point. It's not about having that train. It's about the people that will be involved in working to make that a reality. That's the piece right there. You know, it's kind of like Edgar Poe says, you know, that the happiness is not in the discovery itself, but in the process of discovery. Oh, beautiful. There we go. Yeah, there you go. That's what I'm talking about. You see, you get Russians and Americans working together to actually make this. That's peace. That is peace. It's in the process of constructing it where you have happiness and peace, not in the end point. The end point will just be, you know, harvesting the fruits of the labor. I'd love to go to Moscow on a train line, you know, go to sleep for a day on a high-speed rail, wake up in Moscow. Great. That's good to me. So, yeah. Are you muted? Is it me?
Okay, yes, that was me. Now, next, let me ask you this. One of the issues is the relationship with Russia and China. You know, that certainly the neocon position was, well, we'll take out Russia first, then we can break Russia into 3 or 4 pieces, you know, and then we'll use that and we'll take China out. There are 3 world powers, that US, Russia, and China. No, we're on a different level than all the other countries in the world for obvious reasons: economic, military, nuclear, you name it. Where do you see the United States in its relationship with the other 2 world powers?
Well, good question. I think first you have to see the United States as a partner of the Chinese and the Russians, which I know just saying that is like you blow every neocon and every neoliberal's mind to bits and pieces, right? First, take a look at China. China's land size, land mass, is roughly equivalent to the United States, right? They're almost the same size, right? And yet the Chinese have 3 times the population of the United States. We got about 350, it's actually going down now, but about 350 million people compared to their 1.2 billion people, right? That's insane amount of people. So, you know, the United States, however, continues to have this sort of dominance around the world, largely because of our military bases and our nuclear bases, right? Post-World War II, we have been postulating like we're supposed to be the world's police keeper and that we act aggressive, you know, to any country that may think about deciding to, you know, upstart and start a war somewhere. But that era is over. That mentality is over. The Russians are not our enemies. Neither are the Chinese, you know. And I know just saying that too, it's like I can already see Rachel Maddow, you know, saying like, oh my God, you know, Russian agent, you know, Jose Vega running against Richie Torres says the Russians are not our enemies. They're not. Okay. First of all, the United States and Russia have such a long shared history, you know, of cooperation. You know, there's a few times I can think of historically that I think are pretty good that exemplify this relationship between the US and Russia. One, I think, is during the Civil War. There's two moments during the Civil War. You know, the British were trying to supply the Confederate soldiers, you know, with ammo, with weapons, you know, to help, and money to help against the North. And the Russians sent the blockade of their navy saying, you're not going to get involved in this war. You're not doing this. You know, that was one time when the Russians helped out us. And the second time, you know, with this sort of shared history is that you see Alexander the Great end serfdom in Russia. And then Lincoln frees the slaves at the same time. There was obviously some kind of national call and response or international call and response going on there, right? Where both of these countries decide to end slavery practically at the same time. Then you have people like John Quincy Adams, who was an ambassador to Russia. You know, he also made it, I believe, in reading his book, he was talking about how he thought that Russian should be a language that Americans learned, you know, in the United States when they went to school, because that would be an important friendship to maintain, that the Russians and the United States should continue to have that friendship. And I think John Quincy Adams had that sort of same relationship to Russia that he believed America had to France as well too, you know, because America and France are tied like this, and he was a big proponent that Russia and America should have that same similar relationship too. So, you know, you realize also, like, World War II happens. The Russians are the ones that liberate most of the camps. The Russians are the ones that took on the heavy casualties. You know, I mean, you just look at what happened at Stalingrad, first of all, but also, you know, I don't remember how many Russians. It was like over 20 million Russians or something or more, you know, but so many people died, you know, that were Russian, you know, that actually beat the Nazis. You know, America wants to come in and take the credit for it. Look, let's, you know, well, and then of course there's also the Chinese aspect too. The Chinese also took heavy casualties during World War II. So, you know, there's a problem, right? You have the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II happens. You have Xi Jinping, Putin, Ibrahim Traoré is there, right? Many foreign heads of countries are there. The United States did not send a diplomat there. That you know is very telling, you know, because it shows that there's somebody or something in the Trump administration that does not want to be seen with these people. However, you know who did go there? Oliver Stone and Ray McGovern, you know, two of our friends. Why? Because the United States, the real conception of the United States, exists in their minds. And they understand something about the United States' relationship to World War II, to Russia, and to China, which is that after World War II, it should have been much more peaceful between our nations. We should have continued to work together and collaborate. This is something that Sun Yat-sen had even asked for as well. And stuff that Sun Yat-sen was talking about in his rebuilding of China post-World War I was exactly this. How do we actually develop good relationships with other nations? And one of the things he said was development, because he said after World War I, other countries are going to start looking at China and are going to start trying to pick its resources. And he said, no, the way to counter that is not simply by building up our military and army. He said, let's just develop our nation right now. Let's build up national rail lines right now. Let's use the resources we have for the betterment of our people. That was his thinking, and that's exactly the thinking the Chinese have adopted now. And it's no different than what people like Henry Carey during the Civil War were advocating for. No different than what Hamilton was advocating for. You know, you use the resources and means of your country to better the lives of the people of your country and its posterity. You don't build for the now, you build for the 50 to 100 years from now, so that the people from 50 to 100 years from now will build for the people for, you know, 50 to 100 years from now, so on and so forth. That was always their conception, and that's universal amongst all our countries and can only happen if we all work together.
All right, let me throw another word. I'm just going to throw words at you. Venezuela.
Oh, look, you know, it's interesting because there were deals made with the administrations in Venezuela to sell the oil, to trade the oil. I mean, this goes way back, and that was never followed up upon, and I think that should be known, right? So when we're coming in here and Trump puts out these statements talking about how, this is about, Venezuela has to give us back our oil and our land, pushing us more continually into forever war. Here's a good story. I was at a debate between Max Blumenthal and Germania Poleo. Germania Poleo is Venezuelan. She's a journalist. She did stuff for the Telegraph and Daily Mail and CNN, right? And she's over there pushing the pro-war line, saying that we need regime change in Venezuela. So there I am. In this debate, and Germania is pushing for war. Max Blumenthal is not, of course. Max Blumenthal is good people. He would never push for war with Venezuela, and he completely just destroys this woman. Her strongest argument was, the CIA that the Maduro regime has to fall, but I can understand if Americans don't want to do it just because they have other problems here. That was basically her main counter argument as to why why an American may not think that we want regime change with Venezuela. And Max Blumenthal just comes in and completely sweeps house and says, no. For example, Tren de Agua, this gang that Trump administration keeps talking about, that was an invention of the CIA. Most of these quote unquote narco traffickers are created by CIA and MI6 forces, to fund their wars. This was very famously happened with the Iran-Contra deal. When we found out that the government of the United States was very involved in dealing drugs to fund Contras. Not only that, but when we were in Afghanistan, why were American and British soldiers guarding poppy fields in Afghanistan so that they can make more opium? Absolutely insane. So, what this thing with Venezuela is yes, of course, just more regime change, more endless war. And they always say, oh, we're going to go in and out quickly. But these things never happen quickly. These things are always year after year after year. One of my young friends, who's 17 years old, he was also at the debate and he raised a good question. He said, I'm supposed to care about Venezuela when the water fountains at my school don't even work, when the bathrooms don't even work. I'm supposed to care about what Maduro's doing. How about what Trump's doing? Okay, how about what Eric Adams is doing? Okay, how about what Kathy Hochul's doing? Okay, maybe we should regime change here. So I mean, this kid.
Well, let me give you an example. I remember when, and me, I'm an independent guy, and you've always been an independent person. But and I respect what you're doing now. You're going straight after Torres, which is wonderful. But I remember over the last election, I was talking to some people from Baltimore, Black people who, let's face it, they've had some difficult situations in Baltimore, right?
Yeah.
And this guy was like, I'm voting for Trump. Didn't like Trump, been a Democrat his whole life, blah, 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 right? He says, I'm voting for Trump. I said, okay. And he knows that I'm an independent. I understand what you're, and I said, so, I just want to, for reference as a journalist, I want to know why you're voting for. You're a guy who's been a Democrat your whole life. You voted for Democrats. Here's what he said. Look around my city. He says, I've been voting for Democrats for the last 30 years. He says, and we got buildings falling around. We got crime everywhere. We're afraid to call the police for crime because they'll beat us over. I call the police for crime and he comes beats the crap out of me and, arrest me. I don't want him in the area because I'm afraid he's going to get me. But the bottom line is he went on and on and on. And basically what he said is, I'm going to vote for Democrats all along. And look where it's gotten me. Absolutely nothing. Things continue to deteriorate. Now, in response to that, here's the reality that a lot of Republicans are starting to wake up to the same thing. You know what I mean? But what we're hearing from people is, I'm sick and tired of the same thing. No matter what happens, they tell me to vote for the lesser of two evils, and I get the evil of two lessers. Anyway, your thoughts on this, since you never run as a Democrat, and if somebody says, well, but the Democratic Party is crap, and you're going to be like, well, yeah, of course, obviously they are, but what's going on here? You are a guy who, who the Democratic Dats are, how the Republicans are. You're challenging Richie Torres as the Democrat this time. Let's talk about that for somebody who would attack you and say, oh my God, you've sold out to the man or something.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking me this question. I've actually been trying to prep for this question too. First of all, Mamdani's win showed that Democrat voters are actually ready for change and for somebody who's not going to bend the knee to Israel. No matter what you may think of Mamdani right now, he showed that people don't want more Israeli first politicians. Now, I intend to get into the Congress by any means necessary. And that was me thinking, about going up against Richie Torres. This situation just kept becoming so much more desperate for the constituents here in the Bronx. And I said, look, I know that I was thinking like them. They know that there's going to be some young progressive person who's going to challenge Richie Torres, who's going to try and go after him, right? And what I heard from the Bronx Democratic Party was that if anybody or me was going to run in the Dem primary, they would run two people to pollute the field, to make sure that Richie Torres could continue to be the congressman of this area. Now, part of the decision to run as a Democrat is to use all available means to me. And because New York City allows you to do both, you can run in the Democratic Party and you can run in the independent line. So meaning if I were to, you just have to petition twice, but even if I were to win or lose the Dem primary, I can still run as an independent on the general ballot, come November. And as a result, I decided I just have to use everything at my disposal to make sure that I can call this guy out. As for the Democrat Party being absolute trash, yes, I make no apology for this party whatsoever. But when I think Democrat, I think FDR. I think Kennedy. Okay, that's my idea of a so-called Democrat. That's who I believe. When I model myself in deciding to run for this party, I think of them and I think of Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Jr. These are the three people that are my guiding light. That's the Democratic Party that I think of. And there is no semblance of that whatsoever anymore. The Democrats are completely rotten and they're so intimidated and afraid by the fact that I decided to run in the primary. I know that one of the fears of people thinking that me running into the primary was going to be one that I would become a Democrat, like in the horrible sense of the word, right? Like become like them. Oh, guys, let's, Hakeem Jeffries has his problems, but let's not challenge him. We just fight it out in the Congress. Or, or Chuck Schumer, he's got a problems, yes, but don't worry, we're Democrats. Not me at all. Not me at all. I do not take back a single word I've said to anybody. No, I'm just using everything at my disposal, and I know they're intimidated by it. I know that they were so off guard by it, they had to react. What did they do? They are running this guy, Michael Blake, who I call Michael Fake, who was the former vice chair of the DNC. Okay, Tulsi Gabbard stepped down to endorse Bernie Sanders in 2015 or 2016. And then Michael Blake, then there was an acting person, and then Michael Blake won the vice chair position of the DNC in 2017. From 2017 to 2021, he is the vice chair of the DNC. What does this guy do? He's over there at 8-pack conferences talking about, wow, Israel, that trip to Israel changed my life. It changes the way I organize. It changes the way I see the world and think
about my bank account.
Yeah, right. And so being the vice chair of the DNC for 4 years, he's clearly dictating and changing policy about Israel and how Israel will react with the Democratic Party. So they're running this guy who's suddenly now anti-genocide and has been for 5 minutes, and then when he comes out, because this guy also ran for mayor. He also ran for mayor of New York City, too. He was running against Mamdani for the primary, so when it comes out that he's running against Richie Torres, he announces the day after Mamdani wins the race. He goes, somebody puts out an article saying, that's funny, you're anti-genocide, because in May, you were saying you were the most pro-Israel mayoral candidate. So what's the word here? Exactly. So they're running this guy, and then they're running Amanda Septimo, who's ran for assembly, who is an assemblywoman, who in June of this year, June 30th, 2025, put out a tweet as an assemblywoman. This is her as an assemblywoman. Not her as a federal elected official. She puts out a tweet as an assemblywoman of the Bronx. Oh, Israel, please strike Iran on our behalf to keep us safe. We cannot allow the Iranians to have a nuclear weapon. I don't think people of assembly district, whatever, are necessarily looking at you as the voice of reason for the Middle East. They're wondering, hey, how are you going to make life more affordable for me? Not how are you going to make sure that Israel strikes Iran? So yeah, it's just completely insane. The people they're running in the Dem primary to pollute it because they're afraid that we might actually get any kind of traction. So I decided, you know what? If going into the Democratic primary means that I actually get to debate Richie Torres, means that I actually get to debate all these other fools, and I get to confront him to his face again, and this time not just in a restaurant setting, but like in a formal place where he can really see me work, then I'm doing it. I'm taking every means available to me, and we have the infrastructure to do so. So that's why I'm always forever an independent, and I'm running in the Democrat primary because it's time they get called out. Because the other problem is that it's not just Richie Torres. I mean, this, it's not just any one politician. I mean, Richie Torres doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned. This guy is just an empty suit. They can replace him with any guy that they want, but what does it say when the whole local government of the Bronx, except for one guy, Gustavo Rivera, he's actually a pretty decent guy, but like the council members of the Bronx, the assembly members of the Bronx, the state senators of the Bronx, and the Bronx borough president all say, yeah, it's kind of a tragedy that we're losing a school that had a 100% graduation rate. Yeah, nothing can be done about that. Hey, let's expedite a casino being built, though. Even though the community voted against the casino. I was there when the community board where the casino would be built met and gathered, and they all voted no, that they didn't want a casino. Mayor Eric Adams comes in, he lowers the voting threshold, so they only needed like 2 or 3 community board members to vote yes. That goes through. Suddenly the council members, the Bronx borough presidents are like, great, this is good economic development. Yeah, I'm sure more prostitutes and more drug dealers is great for the freaking economy. These people are completely insane. And it's all being run by the Bronx Democrat Party, who I have no intention of being friends with. I am going to call them out because they are the ruling class here in the Bronx. And it's time somebody serves them a can of ass whooping, verbally, of course, not physically. So anyway, yeah.
So last thing, well, we got a couple 14 minutes anyway. The last thing. Israel, Zionism, boom.
Okay. Oh man. I don't even know where to begin. I guess I'll talk a little bit about sort of my journey of understanding the question about Israel. It became accelerated after October 7th. Even before October 7th, I confronted Richie Torres. I actually confronted Richie Torres the first time in February of 2023. And I actually have a picture with him. I took a selfie with him just before I intervened on him. He didn't know who I was. I said, Congressman, I'm such a fan. Can I take a selfie with you? And anyway, but when I confronted him in February of 2023, so this is, months before October 7th, 8 months before October 7th, I was confronting him on the fact that Seymour Hersh had said that, the United States had bombed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And I said, what are you going to do about it? He said, well, the Europeans are conducting an investigation, and so I haven't heard anything. And I was pretty pissed off about that. So I just kind of kept going at him and kept confronting him, and he didn't really know what to say on that. He kind of lost his ground. And at the end, I said, I also happen to hear you're a tool for the Israeli lobby. And, how can you deny what's happening to the Palestinians, but you support what's happening in Ukraine? I think that's what I had said then. And so he was just like, he didn't know what to do, what to say. And I was, quietly walked out of there. And then there was an article published in J Forward called, fringe anti-Zionists anti-Semites go after Richie Torres. And they didn't cover anything of what I said in the first 3 minutes, just that last 30 seconds where I called him an Israeli lobby plant. And they said anti-Semite Jose Vega, is calling out Richie Torres, saying he's a, quote, Israeli lobby tool. Now, the thing is about Zionism and Israel as a whole is that, first of all, I don't think, and FDR didn't agree with this either, that there should have been Israel where it is now. FDR said, look, if you just put it there, you're just going to piss off a lot of Arabs and Palestinians. Quite frankly, he made a mistake in dying. He shouldn't have died. FDR shouldn't have died. I think that might have been handled a little differently. I don't know why the British thought that through the Balfour Declaration, they can just give off that land to the Israelis. That made absolutely no sense to me. What do you mean that one country can own another piece of land? But here's the thing. The United Nations in 1947, 1948 makes a resolution saying, okay, fine. There can be an Israeli state as long as the Palestinians have a right to return. This was because the Nakba had just, wiped out a lot of Palestinians, and a lot of Palestinians had to flee. And only when that condition is met can there be an Israeli state. Okay, that condition has never been met. Then there was another war, 67, 68 happens, okay, then their borders are redrawn. But since then, there has just been conflict and conflict and conflict. And Israel has always been a tool of the British and the United States. I mean, you just listen to the way the officials talk about Israel. It's our Middle East, aircraft carrier or something, like as if the United States only uses this place as a military base. Now, I know that there have been some actual attempts towards peace, Yitzhak Rabin and Arafat. I often get into discussions about this time period. I know Max Blumenthal isn't necessarily particularly optimistic about, Yitzhak Rabin and Arafat when they met. But, here's the thing. Rabin was a killer. I mean, the guy was just like a cold-blooded killer. He was the number one butcher of the people of Palestine and Gaza. And it was only at the point he said, you know what, this isn't working. And he said, maybe we have to change our axioms. Maybe we have to change the way we think about peace going forward. Maybe we have to change the way we think about what peace and security is. And that's at the point, and that's the launch pad for why he meets Arafat. And Yitzhak Rabin, towards the end of his life, he has some great quotes like, peace and security is not an Apache helicopter. It's not a gun. It's not an assault rifle, right? It's working with your friends, working with your neighbors, Now, I'm not saying the deal was perfect. It wasn't. And the reason it wasn't perfect was because they didn't have shovels in the ground to develop, but that intention and that basis was the reason why Rabin would be assassinated by who Rabin's wife believes was Netanyahu, who had Rabin assassinated, and that led the Likud party to come in and just take complete, total overhaul of the Israeli government. So here's how I see, the Israel-Palestine situation nowadays. It's like, look, you got security interests on both sides, and the only way you're going to fix the situation is not through guns. It's not through bombing. First, you have to get the Netanyahu government out. I mean, that's just non-negotiable. You can't start negotiating anything with a Netanyahu government. But I look at people like Gershon Baskin, who talk about the need for a new security and development architecture, echoing what Helga Zepp-LaRouche has been calling for a while. And what needs to be done is an oasis plan, as the Schiller Institute has been calling for one. One which says, look, people want to talk about oil. People want to talk about resources. How about water? How about water? One of the things that's awfully contested in Israel is the Golan Heights. Does it belong to Syria? Does it belong to Israel? And Israel claims it's a strategic position to hold because people were shooting missiles in. Actually, that's not, that might be true, but the other reason the Golan Heights was strategically important is because of the flow of water. People don't often talk about that another reason Israel controls that is because they want to control the flow of water. Israel doesn't have the water of gallons per person a day. I think it's only like 80 gallons per person a day they have available in Israel. To be considered a developed nation by the United Nations standards, you need 200 gallons of water available per person per day. Israel doesn't have that. Palestine, I think, only has like 5 to 10 gallons of water per person every single day. So you need to have rapid water desalination, and you need to have that in now. And somebody has to go into Palestine, pick up the rubble, and decide to rebuild it and to rebuild Gaza to look like Shanghai. That's what I think the Palestinians want. People say, well, shouldn't we ask the Palestinians what they want? Okay, I don't think they're going to be opposed to clean water and proper housing. And I think this has to be a joint international effort with the Russians, the Chinese, the United States, and the Brazilians. That's the only way we're ever going to get any real movement, any real trust between these countries. I will just say that is the only way forward. People want a political solution. We can have a political solution, but only after we decide to rebuild Gaza, rebuild the economic reality for rebuild a economic prosperous future for the people of Gaza and Palestine. But it begins by rebuilding here at home as well, because the steel that we're going to send over there will be from the steel plants that we reopen in the United States. This was the basis of what I called an oasis plan for Palestine, an oasis plan for New York. in rebuilding New York City and rebuilding the United States and rebuilding the country as a whole, what you're going to do, you're going to see rapid development and shift. You're going to see steel plants open up again. You're going to see manufacturing plants open up again. You're going to see wood. You're going to see carpenters. You're going to see welders. You're going to see construction workers open back up again. And we're going to send the resources that we're using, that we're reopening, that we're rebirthing, basically recreating in the United States. We're going to send that over to Palestine. We're going to send over our people to Palestine as well, because that will be atonement. Because I don't think you can bring back the people you killed. You just can't. But you can give them a future. That's the proper exchange. You can give people a brighter future.
Last thing, since we got about 5 minutes, you know,
I'm here.
Okay. Here's the issue, and that is Pentagon budget. They just passed another $1 trillion Pentagon budget. They want golden ships or whatever, which would be like golden targets for hypersonic missiles. Come on, that golden ships crap. This is not 1945 where you got big battleships. They'd last 5 minutes, right now with a salvo of hypersonic missiles. Oh, yeah. Although a lot of people make a lot of money off the golden ship for the fleet of golden ships now, which would never get built, but a whole lot of people would get paid. The issue of economic sovereignty, and I don't just mean I don't just mean money going to Ukraine and money going to Israel and Taiwan or wherever. That's one side of it. But economic sovereignty in that we got homelessness, we have bridges, we got as you said, we need to build, they're like, oh, let's put $500 billion into AI when we could put $500 billion into building a bunch of new steel plants, right? We got homelessness. We got people suffering here. We got a lack of jobs, but they got money for their pet projects, which are always something that's going to help them to, try to take over the world or something again. Your thought of that issue of an economic sovereignty, and I mean the sovereignty of the masses, the sovereignty of where the money, all this money is spent on people as opposed to these, fake weapons and golden domes. We got golden domes, which won't work. We got golden ships, would last 5 minutes. We got everything golden, but there's no gold for the people.
Well, this issue of we have $1 trillion defense budget, right? So I mean, like I was giving you some basic numbers earlier, right? The fact that you need $80 billion to fix public housing just in New York City alone, which is a big number, but also we could just get that from the Pentagon budget, or we can also defund our intelligence agencies, which I'm completely in favor for. But you're right. You look at people nowadays who can't afford a home. They're just not going to be able to afford a home, and now Trump is talking about 50-year loans. FDR pioneered the 30-year loan, right? The idea you could buy a home within 30 years, pass it off, economic wealth. Some people qualify for 20-year loans. Even better, people qualify for 15-year loans. 50-year loans when the average home buyer is 59 years old now or something like that. Well, for a first-time home buyer, you're going to be dead before you ever own a home. It's completely insane. And I think it has to be reversed. And the way we're going to reverse it is, of course, by increasing productivity again. People say, well, if you build more houses, you create more supply. Well, how about building new cities? How about we start there? How about we start by building new cities? If you take the entire United States right now, and you were to map out every single place that needs emergency repairs, you would declare a state of emergency tomorrow. Because that's what I want to do. As a congressman, I would go in there and I would just tell the president, you need to declare a state of emergency on the country, and you need to declare an emergency crash program to rebuild the United States right now. How about we take that $1 trillion and we invest that here at home? What could $1 trillion do for the entire United States? What could $15 trillion do for the United States? How much money would it cost to build a new city nowadays of 5 to 10 million people? How do we build 3 New York cities? How do we build 3 Cincinnatis? How do we do that? Where are we going to put it? We have a whole lot of land and not a whole lot of things being built. So what does that mean? You just have to think like a city builder. Okay, if we're going to build cities, are we going to import the steel from China that produces 3 times the steels we do? No. We're going to reopen our steel plants. We're going to do it now. We're going to do it here, and we're going to fire on all cylinders. We're going to rebuild our glass plants, our steel plants, our all kinds of factories that are required to build cities, plumbers. Then you're going to say, hey, I don't have enough plumbers. I don't have enough welders to build 10 new cities in 10 years. Well, then let's get an emergency crash program. Let's get them right now. And even if you were to take every 18 to 26-year-old that exists on the United States right now, it's still not going to be enough if you want it done within 10 years. So what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to take the immigrants that are coming here. You're going to say, listen, you want citizenship? You're going to go through a 2-year crash program to learn how to be an engineer and a welder, and you're going to work for us by building a city. We're going to pay you while you're doing that. If you succeed in doing that, if you succeed in building a city for us, we'll give you a citizenship in exchange. That is how you use the people that are coming in to increase your population and use it for productive means and productive labor. That's what you do. You know, you take people coming in, you make them productive, you give them a job, you give them a living wage. That is what I think should be done right now on an emergency basis, because you're saying, look, we don't have enough people. We got people who are coming in here who say they want to work. Let's give them the training and let's put them to work. Let's put them to work right now. People think that migrants come here because and life is all dandy. I saw the hotels they were staying at here in New York City. A lot of the women had to resort to prostitution to make a living, you know. It was horrible. The men were doing all kinds of side hustles just to make a living. You know, people don't come here expecting a dandier life. They know it's going to be hard, you know, because we messed up the places where they came from. So as a result of building all of this, as a result of building new cities, new housing, new hospitals, new schools, training up people, you have created a population of people who are productive. You have created a population of people who are educated, who are skilled, you know, who want economic sovereignty. And 50 years from now, you will see a United States that will return back to the affordability of the 1960s, where everything was so cheap, and will have energy that will be too cheap to meter. You know, that's what I genuinely believe if we decide to go through with the plans that I have instituted as my policies now.
All right. Before we go, let's take a look at this one more time. Jose Vega, Richie Torres.
Congressman, you eat here? Really? I live in the neighborhood. Wow, that's awesome. You know, it's hard because people don't often see you in the neighborhood. That's crazy. You know, let me tell you something. You know, what is it about you and endless war? You just seem to love war, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Gaza. You know, the thousands of dead Palestinian children that you funded. You know, don't you think that that's crazy? You know,
why do you run cover for war?
Do you agree or disagree with the DNI that the war in Ukraine is pretty much over and that the Trump administration is trying to? I'm a tool of the Kremlin? Seriously? You know what is reality? That you are responsible for the death of thousands of Palestinian children, thousands of Ukrainian children. You love funding war. You love funding genocide. Listen, the crown prince of genocide is here, thinking he can just get away by sitting here and eating comfortably while there are thousands of Palestinian children who have to suffer because of the decisions of this guy, who is either responsible, since he's in the Congress, for doing absolutely, you know, nothing about it, or the fact that he gets funding from AIPAC.
Cover for war criminals. Why do you use our voice
Congressman,
to support the erasure of Palestine?
Congressman, no matter where you go in the Bronx, people hate you because they know the truth about you, Congressman. They know what you really are, a sellout, an AIPAC sellout, okay? All you do is get paid by the Israeli lobby. You are nothing. You're a joke of a congressman. You have no real principles whatsoever.
Why do you use my voice to whitewash war crimes, Richie Torres?
Congressman!
Why do you use my voice to run cover for war criminals like Bibi Netanyahu? What do you get from Israel to run cover for them? You're a disgrace. You're a disgrace to your constituency. You should resign. You should be primary.
Take care,
Shame
Congressman.
on you, Richie. Don't touch me. You don't need to touch me. Come on, guys. Let's go. You made your point.
Well, there we got there we have it. Jose Vega. Let's take a look here. Let's see. And for those of you who may be interested in supporting Jose, there you got it. Jose Vega. Let's say in the Bronx. That is votevega.nyc. Votevega.nyc will get you to Jose Vega's site, Jose Vega for Congress, and that's awesome. I never get enough of those interventions. They're great to see, and I'll tell you why. We can end up with a little very brief conversation on that. Tell you why. If you're a member of Congress and somebody comes to you and they're a constituent and they're in your district and they say, I got a problem with something you're doing, you have a duty to speak to them. You have a duty to hear them. What do you have to say? You started off asking him questions. He could have just said, you know what? I'll answer those questions. I was with John Conyers one time at this event, and somebody started screaming in the back, Mr. Conyers, we need to do this and that. And they're screaming, and there's like the press and everybody there. John Conyers said, everybody stop. I'll never forget this. And he said, we've got somebody in the back who has something to say. He went and brought the woman forward and says, I want people to hear what you have to say. Here's the microphone. And the person was like, they were kind of scared. And then they just kind of went, well, I think this. Thank you. Is there anything else? It was deep respect. It was a guy saying, member of Congress, I thought a lot of Conyers, who said, look, you got something to say. Here, the microphone's yours. I'll listen to the people, right? Now we get these clowns when somebody says, hey, man, I got a question. I'm unhappy with you doing. Hey, goons, send the goons to get him. We got to get this guy out of here. Where are my goons? Get this guy, for God's sake. It's unbelievable. And you are demonstrating, I think, the reality, and that these people are not in touch with us. They don't give a crap about us, and they don't represent us. You get the last word, Jose Vega.
Yeah, I'm committed to hosting a town hall as often as I can. I mean, anytime the Congress is not in session, I will be in my district talking to people, going around to people, and hosting town halls. I think that that's the number one most important thing, is that I continue to hear from people and they hear from me. The idea of being an elected official in a republic means that the people trust in me to make the decisions for them. As a result, if they're wrong about something, it's my job to tell them why I think they're wrong about something, because I could be wrong. And it's my job to hear from them too. It's my job to be held accountable to them and also to explain to them why I vote the way I do. For example, the war in Ukraine, right? That's a doozy. That's one that people here disagree with me on. They think that the Ukrainians should get all this funding. And I say, well, it's not about them getting the funding or not. It's about, do you want peace or not? To be able to have these dialogues with people is critical, because I want them to be just as informed and educated. It's like, this is the information I got. This is the way I'm voting. Now you know why I am voting the way I am and why I say what I think. Now you tell me what you think about that. You tell me, are you going to adopt the way I think? Do you disagree with the way I think? I want to hear what people have to say. And then the other thing is, people will know, even if they disagree with me on a vote, I want them to know that the people in my pockets are them. It's the small dollar donors. It's not the APACs of the world. It's not the Wall Street lobbyists of the world. It's not the crypto donors. I want someone who disagrees with me to say, I hate the way Jose thinks. I hate what he believes. I think he's wrong on economics, but I trust him. I trust him to have my best interests. And that is the kind of relationship I want with the people who don't support me, now at least. But they will. So that's my last word.
All right. Where can people go online, on social media, et cetera, to find your stuff?
People can go on votevega.nyc. We actually started a campaign to raise $25,000 by New Year's. We're doing pretty good so far. We're at something like $12,000. So we're almost halfway there. So we got another 6 days to go. So if you want to help us, you go to votevega.nyc. The legal limit that a small dollar donor can do is $3,500. So if you've got $3,500 lying around for Christmas, please feel free to donate it. But every dollar truly does help. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose Vega. So we're going to have Jose Vega back regularly if he is available, and talk to him, get updates on his candidacy and all the good work he's doing. Thanks a lot, everybody. And everybody, you see all the stuff going by. And of course, if anybody has any questions, if anybody wants to contact Jose, and there are a lot of people out there who don't. You see my P.O. Box, 32 Glen Burnie, Maryland. There are a lot of people out here. It's been very valuable. There are a lot of people out here who maybe don't like to put their stuff online, don't like to send stuff, they're concerned or aren't that good. I got a P.O. box. If you want to send something to Jose, if you want to send a letter to him, whatever, email it. You can snail mail it to me at my P.O. box. Anything you want to get to him. If you don't want to do it online, send it to my P.O. box and I'd be happy to forward it. to Jose. And of course, anything people send books and magazines and letters and whatever to my PO box. That's a place for those. And there are a lot of us who don't like to do the online stuff, still like to use the snail mail. So I provide that for those people. Thanks a lot, Jose. Thanks a lot, everybody. Don't forget, you guys and girls, the most important thing that you can do is share this